Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Live at Builders Millwork. Today I am here with Brandon Jort from Marvin Windows. Brandon's an architectural project manager. Brandon, tell us what we're going to do today.
Yeah, so today our plan is to install one of our Essential picture windows into a wall. We're going to talk in detail about flashing, setup, and just some different methods and things to think about when installing a new construction window.
What do you think that is the most common misconception when it comes to installing windows?
You know, I think a lot of times it comes down to just the basics, right? Ensuring that the installer, your team, yourself, are just following some of the basic principles of installation. You know, it comes back to plumb, level, square when we're putting the window in, and also ensuring that we're flashing appropriately, starting, really today is what we'll show, starting bottom and then working our way up to the top to make sure you've got a nice sealed opening that's gonna last for years to come.
Awesome. So I'm assuming that things like the exterior facade, what goes around the window makes a difference, all of those pieces of the puzzle. So there really is a lot of pieces of the puzzle that make just, whether it's a small window like we're looking at today or a big giant window, which Marvin has, huge windows. I think I was out in the warehouse the other day and I seen a window that was like 10 foot wide by 9 foot tall, giant window. But same application from an installation standpoint as far as how we flash and how important that is to keep Mother Nature out.
That's right. You know, and the principles, many of the principles will stay the same. You know, but I'll say too that every scenario is different, right? So we think about a general install, again, guidelines, but you really have to think, you know, there's going to be different siding perhaps that's going on the outside. Is it a stone application? Is it a 2x6 wall, a 2x4 wall, a 2x8 wall, or even deeper when we put the window in? Thinking about where a window is sitting within the wall itself. All of these things can really make an impact in, you know, taking your standard install and making it look a little bit different from what you're going to see today. But at the same time, again, as long as we're following those general principles, thinking about, okay, if water gets in, how do we get it out? And then how do we keep it out to begin with? So all those things work together and come into play when we think about installation.
Awesome. Well, we got a lot to think about, a lot to do here, so let's get started.
Awesome. Let's dive in. So today we're going to start out, again, new construction installation that we're going to work with today. We have our weather-resistant barrier here on the wall. There are a lot of different products and materials out there. We're not going to speak to any one specific brand today as we go, but really we're just going to follow our general installation guidelines that we list today in our install instructions.
Perfect.
Now, one thing that's important to note, today here we're in August 2025. I think the most important thing we can do anytime we're approaching an install and we're working with a window manufacturer, supplier, always take a look at the installation instructions before you begin. And I call out today's date because I'm going to showcase this as it's written today, but that doesn't mean things can't change perhaps 3 weeks, 6 months, or years down the road.
Sure.
In terms of best practices and what we found it perhaps works better than what we're looking at today. In general, most suppliers' window installation instructions are written after a standard. So you'll see in our install instructions, we call out an ASTM E2112. So in our installation and flashing guidelines, it's really a general practice or best practice that we outline in our installation instructions.
Thanks, Brandon. That's a great point. One of the things that I want our audience and our customers to know is that please utilize Builders Millwork and our sales staff when you come into questions like this. A lot of these window installations, they might be on a QR code that's on the window, but we would have the ability to print something out or talk to our sales staff, the outside salesperson that you're working with. They'll come out to a job site and answer some questions and work through these situations with you. That's what we're here for.
So I'm going to get started now for making our initial cut really to pull back our barrier and start the installation process. Now, you'll see I've got a couple of lines drawn here. So what we'll show today in our installation instructions with our Essential line is very specific rough opening prep for how we prepare this rough opening. In the past, we've seen different methods of opening up your building paper, your weather-resistant barrier. In the past, we've seen an X cut. We've seen a recommendation for a cut to come down and then fan out to the sides. Today we do something a little bit different, or we recommend something a little bit different. So we're gonna cut across the top. We're gonna come out 45 degrees on each side, but you'll notice a detail down here where we're gonna cut up about 2 inches and over 3.5 inches. So that'll come into play a little bit later. After we laid out our sill rep, we get the window in, and you'll see how that building paper then wraps around the actual sill, the sill protector or the sill itself.
Awesome.
Great. So I'm gonna start here on the bottom. Forgive me for giving you my back here for just a moment. So I like to start at the bottom, get these initial cuts in, just because it's a little bit easier when the paper is actually applied to the wall this way. Then I'm gonna come up here to the top. I'm gonna cut a 45-degree angle at the top of the window or the head of the window unit itself. And I'm gonna come up this side and do the same cut here on this side. Once I have these cuts in place, I'm gonna go ahead and find the top of the window opening at the head of the window, and I'm gonna cut all the way across from end to end. And this is gonna give me just a slight flap here at the top of the building paper. Once I've got this flap set up, I like to take a small piece of tape, and I'm just gonna go ahead and tape that up to the top just to hold it up and out of my way as I continue to make some cuts down the paper and across the bottom or the sill.
So that's a temporary cut or a temporary tape up. We're gonna move that. That's something else is gonna happen, right?
Exactly. So I'm gonna come bottom up and top down, right down the middle of the paper here.
And I think it's important to note here too that like we see that we've got a seam of paper. That can happen.
It can, yes. You know, and we did this today. Just to, we wanna make sure we cover our wall completely. But you can run into this, you can have a seam. It's not ideal in a window opening, but again, site conditions can vary depending on how things look there on the job site. So in an actual wall, we would have a condition here where everything would be peeled back and in essence, this would be tacked, taped, or temporarily placed to the side of the wall to give you access to your window rough opening or the window opening itself. Important to note, today we're working with a mock wall today. This represents a 2x4 in terms of the sill or the frame that runs around. Traditionally, what we see in our market here though is going to be, again, 2x6 or much deeper wall. Prior to this step that I'm about to show, we'd like to see a sloped sill, so perhaps a piece of cedar siding running along the bottom of the window opening here, or even like a composite siding perhaps laid down to give the sill itself a slope towards the exterior. The idea behind that is just in case if any water ever does get into this opening, it could perhaps come from the window itself or the flashing, but that water could also perhaps come from a roof or another part of the building. Any water that penetrates into this rough opening, when it hits the bottom, that sloped sill will allow that water to drain out towards the exterior, preventing water penetration to the interior of the building itself.
It makes perfect sense. I knew a gentleman that was in the industry for a long time, and he used to say that when he was talking about roofing and window installation, we have to think like a raindrop.
It's perfect. That's exactly right. And thinking about redundancy, right? How can we build redundancy into our system, right? So that we are planning to have everything perfect, but for that just in case, right? So always building in, thinking redundancy in the installation itself. So we've got our cuts made, we've got our flap folded back, we've got our building paper taped back. The next step, I'm gonna come around to the other side of the wall, and I'm gonna go ahead and apply that sill piece, or sill dam, if you will. Begin to build our sill dam, I should say, from the inside or on the bottom of the window first. Excellent. So we're gonna start to apply here our sill pan into the rough opening. Again, initially we've got a slope sill to the outside, bringing water, anything that lands here, from the inside to the exterior. And I've got this pre-cut and ready to go right here into our window opening.
A lot of things that we can do to pre-prep then. Understanding the width and heights of our windows, pre-cutting this product is going to make that installation process a little bit smoother. So these are all things we learn as we do it, right?
Very true, very true. So I'm going to use this, I'm going to start in the center of my opening with this pre-cut piece. And again, I've got it measured out so I know right about where it's going to fall. And I'm just gently going to lay this down into my rough opening. So now, first thing I want to do is I'm going to press down into the corner to bring this flexible flashing membrane out to each corner. If you have a speed square handy, it's a great time to pull that out. You can use that to really get good adhesion and get that pressed all the way up into the corner on both sides. Now you'll recall we made these cuts initially when we set up our exterior paper here. So at this stage, once I get this wrapped up into the opening, we're gonna fold this out at these corners, and it's gonna tuck back behind the cuts that we made as we prepared the opening itself. Now, one important note, the sill flashing that I'm using, as I mentioned, it's a 2x4 wall. This is a little bit thicker. This would be better utilized than a 2x6 wall. So I did cheat it into the interior a little bit.
Okay.
Traditionally on a job site though, your framing is gonna run right here to the interior edge of your sill flashing here.
Gotcha.
So underneath this, again, we've got our sloped sill, sloped to the exterior. We've got our flashing membrane laying down. Now, some manufacturers will recommend that we use something like this, a J-roller, to go ahead and roll that flashing membrane down to get good adhesion between the flashing tape and the substrate, in this case, the wood rough opening.
Perfect.
At this stage of the game, I'm gonna go ahead and fan out or fold these out at each corner, and then we'll get started bringing our paper back in. Make sure I'm clear there. Just give me a tug on that. So now we've got our sill membrane laid down. Again, we can use a roller to apply this. You'll see we're starting to raise up a little bit here. If we were to take that J-roller, we could roll down this flashing material to again get good adhesion to the exterior and pay special attention to these bottom lower corners. Oftentimes on a job site, I do see with these flexible sill pans being laid down, this will have a tendency to want to roll up at the edges.
Sure.
So this is a great tool.
Weather patterns change things.
Very true.
It's August right now, and we happen to be inside, but we could be outside, and it could be January, and that changes the way we have to do things a little bit.
You're absolutely right. And you think about, to your point, weather patterns and also what materials you're using. So different manufacturers will have different specifications in terms of, now this is with flashing manufacturers, what are acceptable temperatures for their material or their product to be used in. So for example, if it's minus 20 degrees, we might not be able to use a specific manufacturer or a specific type of flashing that day. So, we started this today, we said, hey, take a look at the installation instructions. And I'd say that's just as critical when you think about the materials you're using around the window itself, ensuring that you're within the appropriate temperatures, compatibility between materials, for example, making sure that your tape will work with your house wrap, for example, that you may be using. So those all become really important pieces to the puzzle. And then also thinking about the sealants that you're using to ensure compatibility between the sealant, your tape, and even the window itself. This now, many years ago, I say many years ago, it still happens today. Sometimes you can go to some big box stores. You'll see windows sitting right next to flashing. If you read the flashing instructions, it will say very clearly, this is an asphalt-based product. You really have to be careful, especially anytime you're mixing an asphalt-based product with any type of vinyl, be it a vinyl nailing fin or a vinyl window. So those can have really compatibility issues that for quite a while were a challenge in the industry. Most tapes today are moving over to a butyl-based system, which doesn't have that compatibility issue. But I promise you this, if you go to your big box store today, I can almost guarantee you'll probably see both of those together, an asphalt-based product next to a vinyl product. So again, knowing compatibility is really critical, really important, especially on large scale installations, or really in any installation.
Any installation. Yeah, great point. Once again, it reiterates the fact that here at Builders Millwork, we want to be helpful to our customer base. These are the kind of questions that we want you to ask us. We want to be involved not only with your customer when they pick out really cool looking Marvin windows, but we want to be involved with a subcontractor that's doing the window install to help ensure that it gets done correctly in the correct way.
It's really great watching your teams work with both your customers as well as your suppliers. Marvin, for example, where we can be of assistance, and also your flashing material suppliers as well with those compatibility sheets as needed and where needed for depending on the project. So I'm gonna go ahead and roll this down just real quick just to get these to tack up to the exterior. So I'm gonna use that J-roller, good adhesion there. I'll come over to this side, get good adhesion here on the edge. Now what we'll show also in our installation instructions today is we'll show just using a small piece of tape to go ahead and lay down at the corners or the edges and get that a little bit longer there.
How about I help?
Yeah, that'd be great. Just lay that down and come down at a 45-degree angle. There we go. And this tape is really just to hold down that edge. So let's say we flash the opening. Perhaps maybe it's the end of the day. We don't get to finish a window installation that day. This will actually hold that down and prevent it from folding up, and also prevent it from folding up even after the window's installed, to help keep that down so you don't have your sill pan rolling up within the opening itself.
Perfect.
All right, so I mentioned we're gonna come back to the sides. Now, I'm gonna show you what we recommend today in our installation instructions, but I'll tell you, I've seen this done different ways. And if you look across our product lines, for example, you'll see some different methods even than what I'm about to show you now. So I'll touch on both of those as we move into the next steps here. So if we can, go ahead and pull that tape. I'm gonna pull this back to the inside. And we're gonna wrap this back into the opening. So a couple things are happening here. When I fold this back to the inside, there's often a lot of discussion, and I would argue debate in terms of what do we do from here, right? I've seen some builders cut the paper back at the edge. I've heard of some builders that want to bring it back and tack it to the inside. You know, the debate goes on, I would say. So what we show today in our instructions, what we'll model today, is we show cutting now your barrier right down the middle of the stud, and we're gonna show a piece of tape then holding that down. So that's what we show today in our instructions. Some builders like that method. They feel they get better adhesion, perhaps between their foam insulation and the framing itself. Some builders like that because they feel it stops airflow from coming back to the inside, whereas others like to wrap the paper all the way around, and they feel that air is that's sealed up in essence by your foam insulation. So different schools of thought there. But again, just gonna show today what we show in our installation instructions, which again, are just based on a standard, right? A standard best practice. So there are different ways to do it, but again, I do wanna stick to and show what we showed today. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut down, again, right about down the middle of the framing here to the interior to trim out my paper on the inside. Perfect. Those of you watching at home, I am right-handed, but I'm gonna go ahead and give it a go with my left hand today on this side. Excellent. All right, so we've got our paper now cut down about center line on the stud and coming in. The next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and run a piece of flash or a piece of tape to go ahead and seal up the initial cut that we made. So I mentioned one way to do it. We show in the instructions, we come up 2 inches, we come over 3.5 inches. And the reason we did that is to allow for this building paper or this weather-resistant barrier now to cover the top of our sill pan that we've created with this flexible flashing material. The concept here is that we're now covering any type of counter flash that could be visible to the exterior of the building. So if we were to imagine for a moment this coming up and terminating here, it would be laying on top of that exterior barrier, and some might argue could create a path for water to get behind. Now, admittedly, we'll show this different ways in different product types and sets. So again, if someone is wrapping it up and leaving it here, it's not an absolute thing that we shouldn't do, but again, we will show it different ways in our installation instructions depending on the product line. It just so happens with Essential, this is how we show the detail, so I'm gonna show that this way today.
Absolutely, it just reiterates the fact that not everything is the same. The installation instructions don't need to end up in the dumpster. They should end up beside the window that you're installing.
Absolutely. First off, I'm gonna come over here. I'm gonna tape the horizontal first. I'll wrap that to the interior. And I'm gonna tape that here on both sides. Excellent. Okay, next. I'm gonna come now inside the window jamb itself, and I'm gonna tape this building paper down, and I'm gonna tape it right down into the rough opening itself. I'm gonna start at the top, and I'm gonna come all the way down here to the bottom, and coming over the top of that prior piece of tape that I laid down. Again, we're in an indoor setting today, which is nice. Today actually it's very nice outside today. But I think about being out in the field, perhaps on a scissor lift, maybe we're 2, 3, 4 stories up. I'm working on a window, especially flashing. We've got wind, we've got the elements that we're dealing with. So today, in this scenario, the tape's laying down real nice. We've got it adhered very nicely to our opening. But again, if you've got a roller on site, if you've got high wind conditions or windy conditions, again, you can use this roller just to get that tape to really lay down and ensure that that's gonna stay down while you're grabbing your next tool or the next thing that you might need for your installation process.
Awesome.
So at this stage of the game, we have our opening really mostly prepared for the window to go in. So if we kind of think working bottom up or top down, at the top, we've got the top folded up with our sheathing exposed. We've got our weather resistant barrier now taped down to prevent airflow, any airflow that might get back behind here. But more importantly, we have a sloped sill underneath this. So the sill currently is sloped, ready to catch any water that might land in here and roll it back towards the exterior.
Awesome.
So at this stage, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna start counter shimming to ensure we've got a nice level surface to install our window onto. Again, going back to the basics, the fundamentals, plumb, level, and square.
Perfect. So I heard you say the word shim. Now, I've been in the business for a little bit. There's all kinds of different shims. Did you bring a few along with you today?
I did, actually. So I've got 2 examples today, and I'll speak to a third example that I would actually recommend for the sill that we're gonna show you. But today I've got a horseshoe or a U-shaped shim. This is becoming more prevalent or popular. Each one of these, I believe, is about 1/16 of an inch. So you can use these shims when you're installing the window, insert them, remove the ones you don't need. They just snap off to give you the appropriate shim spacing, and it enables you then to drive your fastener right between that horseshoe. The nice thing really with these is with doors. When we're installing doors, if we're using more of a traditional style shim, and I'll say a lot of builders and contractors are really good with these, but I've also seen some challenges with these. So when we think about shimming a door, if we're using 2 shims running the same direction, we can start to run into a situation where we start curling jambs or moving the jamb of the door itself. But again, there's another available shim, probably the most common out there in the marketplace today, where we'd see these used coming up side to side, shimming, cutting, breaking off, and then fastening through. The third that I don't have with me today would be a composite shim. And that's really what I would look to use on the sill here, because again, with our sill sloping towards the exterior, I would want to use a shim to counter shim my sill. So I'd lay these down about I'd say every 4 inches to counter shim to give myself a nice level surface to set the window on top of. And that again enables any water that's hitting the sill to then roll out to the exterior. Gives me a little bit of a gap along the bottom there. Fair enough?
Makes perfect sense.
When we apply shims, one thing I wouldn't recommend is fastening through the shim. We went through the effort of creating a water resistant barrier here on the sill. So what I would recommend here and what we show is just maybe a little dab of sealant or silicone laid down, and that shim in essence just getting glued down to give you that nice flat surface. Next, we're gonna go ahead and grab a window. We're gonna get it set up and placed into the opening. Excellent. All right, so again, can't stress enough, slope sill at the bottom, we're counter shimmed underneath. We've got our window set into the opening. The first thing that we wanna do is just tack a corner down to get the window held into place so it's nice and safely held into the opening while we adjust for plumb, level, and square.
Perfect.
Now, Shane, today I'm using a screw today to fasten the window into the opening. What we'll show in our installation instructions is actually a 2-inch roofing nail used to fasten the window into the opening.
Okay.
So when we performed our testing behind the scenes prior to rolling the product out for performance grade testing, which in essence is how much wind and water loading the window can take, we use those 2-inch roofing nails as sort of the standard for installation. Now, you can use screws when you're installing, if that's your choice, just ensuring that it's going to have the same characteristics as that 2-inch roofing nail, which again, many screws do, but you'd want to verify with your supplier on the specific type of screw that you're going to use.
Absolutely.
So for today, we talked about best practices, and those are really, really important in terms of installation in general. We also talked about when we're flashing a window, there may be different ways to do it, for example, right? Someone might say, hey, that's a great method, but I feel I get the same results or better by doing it this way, right? Those things exist when we think about installation, right? So perhaps someone doesn't make this cut, they wrap their flexible flashing up, and now they'll have some exposure here. However, with that being said, they're going to then flash over it when we get to the jambs. Where I'm going with this is thinking about the installation itself. Probably one of the more critical things is thinking about your fastening. So windows are tested for structure and water infiltration. They're also tested for air infiltration. Those tests are very scientific and specific how they're performed, but what's really important is how the window itself is fastened into that opening. So when we think about perhaps a 120 or 100 mile per hour wind equivalent being pressed or drawn against a window, when we're performing that test, we want to make sure we're following that fastening schedule that we recommend as a manufacturer to make sure you're going to get that same performance out in the field once you've installed your window. So a couple key points with fastening. We want to ensure that we're fastening within 6 inches of the corner of each corner of the window when we do fasten. And then our fastening guideline for this particular window unit is every 6 to 8 inches thereafter. Okay. So again, 6 inches from the corner, 6 to 8 inches thereafter. It's about every other hole on this nail fin, again, as of today.
Sure.
Other methods might include structural brackets or even a through jamb installation where the window is fastened through the jamb into the opening as well. So again, some different ways to do it. Doesn't make one right, one wrong, but just important to note that really paying attention to that fastening schedule is pretty important when we do a window installation.
Absolutely.
One thing we didn't show when we had the window in is sealing or putting caulking behind the nail fin. So prior to getting the window set in the opening, we'd want to run a bead of sealant along the back side of the nail fin, not too thick, not too thin, just right, but we want to run that and run about 3/4 inch shy of the corners here. So we're getting good adhesion, good seal between the fin and our wall here.
Okay.
From there, we're going to tack in the corner. And this then enables us to check things like plumb, level, and square with the window itself. So at this stage, if this was an operable window, I'd want to take my tape measure. I'd want to measure my diagonals for square. Is the window square or out of square? Perhaps adjusting the window as needed. And then also thinking about level. Is it level now that it's installed? And the most common thing I see, really more so on doors, but is the window plumb? So is it plumb in the opening? Is the top leaning out or leaning in? So this is the stage or the point when you'd want to make those adjustments so that you are sure that you've got a window that's true in the opening itself.
So important, I think, Brandon, and what we see a lot is time is of the essence, and we know that everybody is busy and their schedules are busy. And so when we get a window job from the warehouse to the job site, they're eager to get the windows installed. But just the conversation that we've had here today, we can't stress enough the importance of taking the time to read those instructions, follow those manufacturer recommendations to the T whenever we can, and stopping and asking questions when necessary, because the next time that we see this opening 2 months from now, or even 2 weeks from now on a job site, it's all closed in. It might have brick, it might have stone, and redoing this is sometime an impossibility, and there's lots of dollars and cents involved in doing that.
Absolutely. All right, so we've got our window installed in the field. We're gonna have a little bit of sealant back behind here. Again, we would have fasteners running every other hole all the way around the unit using 2-inch roofing nail or equivalent. Today we're using a screw. Next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and get a small piece of flashing, the flashing that we're gonna use to flash around the window itself. But I'm gonna put these at the corners of the window to just cover up these gaps up at the top, or really the top and bottom here at the corners. It's important that we get one of these at each and every corner location of the window itself. We just really want to cover that gap to ensure we've got something for our flashing to really adhere to. I almost think of this as a backer rod before we lay our flashing down along the jambs. One thing that I have seen, we talked about, some of the common things I see. I wouldn't call this a common error that I see, but I want to speak briefly about high pressure skirts. So we show what we refer to as a high pressure skirt in our installation instructions. We are going to apply that today to show it as optional, but when might that be necessary, right? I think that's really what it comes down to. So architecturally, we can run different calculations, talk about wind speed, pressure that a building might face. But when I'm in the field, or from the builder in the field, if I can stand at the window and if I can see, I'd say about a half mile with uninterrupted wind flow, that's where I'd really recommend a high pressure skirt as something that I would, even though it's stated as optional, that's something I'd really want to put on my window installation. The reason being, when we look at this opening, we've got some sealant behind the nail fin on 3 sides. We're on the jambs, we're across the head, but not on the bottom. We leave the bottom open because we want that water
Absolutely
to weep out. However, when we put our siding up, some siding manufacturers will require or state that you should seal perhaps between the siding and the window. Others might not. So again, that's something that's really out of the window manufacturer's control, but something to take into account. So I use that example of, can you see a half mile? So imagine that wind flowing across a half mile, wind-driven rain. It could perhaps hit the siding, it could hit the bottom of the window, and that pressure could try to push that rain back beyond this nailing fin. So what this high pressure skirt's going to do is kind of seal up the bottom, bring it down to prevent that water from having potentially a straight shot from hitting your siding, again, if it's not sealed, and running right back into the window.
Makes perfect sense.
So when we apply this, we're just going to use a piece of tape. You can even use the same type of flashing tape that we've got shown here. We show that in our instructions, but we're really just gonna tape it up underneath the bottom of the window. So what we've done is we've stopped that direct potential for air or water flow from outside, again, coming across that potentially half mile, hitting and rolling back into our opening. So we created a condition here where water can still weep out. It can still leak out behind the pressure skirt, but water would have to have more exponential pressure to hit here, pump up and into your window opening. So this will really help you, especially again in those high exposure situations. You can go to many websites, map websites, Google, for example. You can right click on the home that you're working on and you can go to that furthest point. Maybe it's a lake or a river or a field perhaps, but you can measure those distances to kind of get an idea of how much open airflow you have on your job site.
So important to understand that the same window in a different house, in a different location, even front of house to back of house, makes a difference. And as we sit here and talk about this wind skirt, such a simple piece of barricade wrap can eliminate so many problems.
Absolutely. Right now we're working bottom and we're going to continue to work our way towards the top. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start applying my flashing material or my tape right to the window and right to the wall to go ahead and start sealing the window itself off. So prior to doing that, actually one more thing, I want to touch on one thing. So our Essential windows come with a vinyl drip cap across the top. Now we'll show a bead of sealant going back behind here to seal that up. So we want to get a bead of sealant underneath that drip cap prior to laying down our flashing. Depending on where you are, many areas will require a rigid head flash at the top of the window. So today we show in our instructions that rigid head flashing going on now prior to flashing both the jambs and the head of the window itself.
Okay.
So whenever I'm applying flashing to the jambs of a window, what I like to do is I like to start at the top. The reason being, I know I'm going to come back with another piece of flashing across the window, so I want to make sure that my flashing isn't going to come up taller than that piece of head flashing that I'm going to put across the top. So I know this is about 4 inches, so I'll come down to right about here, and I'm going to lay this down just gently here across the face of the window frame. I'm just going to slightly tack it down with my fingers, and then I'm going to do the same on the back side here. So the reason I'm doing that, a nailing fin that runs around the window is really an installation aid. So it's not designed to prevent water from penetrating into the opening. So we want to get great adhesion between our tape and the frame of the window itself. So again, if we are running our flashing tape here or tall or proud of the nailing fin, that could potentially present some challenges for someone down the road. So now that I have it lightly on the face, lightly here on the back side, I can press this down with my hand and I can get, again, great adhesion back to the window frame itself, completely covering that installation aid that runs around all sides of the window unit. Once I have that done, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and I want to make a cut here. That cut is going to be about a 45-degree angle coming top down, and that's going to enable me to then fold this flashing tape over to get good adhesion again against the wall prior to bringing my head flashing across.
Perfect.
Okay, again, last but not least, I'm going to come across the top with my head flashing, again, working bottom up. It's really important. We want to make sure that this flashing, when it comes across the top, we don't want it to run low. We want to make sure we're covering this piece of tape and coming all the way up here onto the wall. Again, this would be considered potential for a counter flash situation where water could potentially get back here. This is going to ensure that if water hits here, when it's rolling down the wall, again, it's going to hit here, roll out on the top, and continue to push the water towards the exterior of the building itself. Again, at my corners, I'm going to come in, make a slight cut here, staying at a 45-degree angle, just to get that to lay down flat. Then I'm going to do the same over here at this end. Excellent. So at this stage, we've got our window fully flashed on all sides. On all sides, we still have our house wrap in this scenario folded back up at the top. Underneath here, again, in many areas, you're gonna have your rigid head flashing setting underneath here. At this stage, we're getting really close to almost done with the installation of this Essential window. Once we get to this stage, I'm gonna take the tape off the top. I'm gonna go ahead and roll this down to start to finish up or complete my installation. Once I have this folded down, I'm gonna take my tape. I'm now gonna tape these seams right here at the top to make sure I'm completely sealing up the top or the head of the window itself. And I'll go ahead and run that across there now. We have our window flash. Just to recap, we started out at the sill. We have a slope in the sill. If any water were to penetrate, we want it to hit, we want it to roll to the outside. We flashed from the bottom up. We did apply a high pressure skirt to the bottom. Again, is an option or optional as listed in our installation instructions. Personally, highly recommended, especially when if we feel like we can see greater than a half mile with uninterrupted wind flow. We flashed bottom up, caulked behind our fin. We've now folded our paper down. We have a piece of tape running across that seam to go ahead and seal that up. And anywhere where you feel you might not have great adhesion, having that J-roller is really important or a really great tool to have on site, because you can then come back, perhaps do a quick roll over any of your tape to make sure you've got real great adhesion down to your weather-resistant barrier, as well as up against your window frame or your window unit itself. At this stage in the process, we'd move back towards the interior, and from the interior, we'd start doing some work to perhaps help with the potential for water to infiltrate, but also when we start to think about foaming around the interior of the window as well. Now, we worked with a picture window today. When we install, we did talk about using fasteners around the nailing fin. We talked about the specifications there. Again, different product types or different unit types within the same product family may require different fastening. A great example of that is a hung window. When a window is traveling up and down, ensuring we've got shims at the check rail or the center of that window, and we're fastening at the check rail to prevent that window from bowing out or in, perhaps hindering the operation of the window unit itself.
Brandon, now that we got this window installed, I'm going to ask you a question. What do you think are the most common mistakes that you see in the field on a regular basis?
Yeah, I think it's staying up to date with changing instructions, right? So going to our website, marvin.com, downloading the installation instructions prior to getting to site, and also using the installation instructions that come with the product. What we show today might not be the same method or thing we might show tomorrow, weeks, months, or years from now. So I think really staying up to date on those things or what's the materials and resources that are made available to you is a common miss that I see oftentimes on site. Outside of that, back to basics: plumb, level, square, ensuring that we're flashing, working our way from the bottom up, and then just building in some redundancy within the system as well. So ensuring that, hey, we're flashed here, we've got additional overlap so we're not counter flashing, and then if any water does get in again, water can find its way out. We want it to get to the outside of the building, not come to the inside, causing that callback and perhaps some costly repairs and damages.
Awesome, great information. Well, awesome. We got a finished product here. We've seen a lot of different things today. There's different methodologies that take place depending on where the building is located. We also have to think about things like codes, recommendations. We talked about we talked about drip caps. So make sure, depending on where you're at in the Sioux Empire, municipalities around, check with your code. If you have questions about these things, again, that's what Builders Millwork is here for. We want to help you make sure that you're ensuring correct installation, not only to keep Mother Nature out, but to abide by code standards. And then it's so important with everything that we've seen today, Brandon, and you've just brought up a lot of stuff that's common sense. Just standard building practices that we use, super important. These guys that are out here in the field know how to do this, and we provide a few extra tools to help them ensure that once they install this window, they can drive by and show somebody that they installed it, but they're not stopping to have to go back and fix something.
That's exactly right. And again, as of today's date, this is what we're showing, but always stay up to date. Taking a look at those installation instructions, both what comes with the product, using websites, using our website, marvin.com, technical specifications, reviewing those install details and instructions prior to getting the site. This can save you a lot of time and heartache, not only on site, but down the road and long term as well.
Brandon, thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate all the information.
Hey, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey folks, thanks for taking the time to watch this video today on a Marvin window installation. Stay tuned for more education and more information here at Live at Builders Millwork.